A long conference table stretched across the glass-walled room, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Los Angeles skyline. At the head sat the executives of Monarch Records, flanked by producers, marketing heads, and a handful of anxious assistants clutching tablets. But the woman at the center of the table, Vivian Cross, commanded the room without a word. She sat with the posture of someone who had spent 2 decades in the spotlight, spine straight, chin lifted, eyes betraying nothing. At 38, Vivian had earned every accolade the music industry could offer, 7 Grammys, a catalog of platinum albums, and the kind of quiet reverence that came from surviving trends and outlasting peers. Her dark hair was swept into a low chignon, and she wore a simple cream blazer that probably cost more than most people's annual rent, but she made it look effortless. She had been in this business long enough to know how these meetings went. First, the formalities. Then, the pleasantries. Then, the big reveal. And today's reveal was her duet partner. The project wasn't just any project. It was a cross-generational collaboration that the label had been hyping for months, a concept album reimagining classic love songs from the last 4 decades, with Vivian curating and headlining. She had signed on because it promised artistic depth, a chance to reinterpret the songs that had shaped her youth, and the prestige of working with a hand-picked collaborator who could match her intensity. Someone serious. Someone with gravitas. The label's CEO, a silver-haired man named Richard, grinned like a Cheshire cat as he tapped the table. "Vivian, I know you've been waiting for this. We searched extensively. We needed someone with undeniable chemistry with you, someone who can hold their own in the spotlight and bring the passion these songs demand." Vivian nodded, her expression unreadable. 20 years in the industry had taught her how to maintain composure, how to keep her face neutral even as anxiety coiled in her stomach. She had worked too hard, fought too long, to let anything compromise this project. "The thing is," Richard continued, his grin widening, "we found someone who's not just talented, she's a phenomenon. She's been breaking records, dominating streaming, and she specifically asked to work with you. Said you were her inspiration." Vivian's eyebrow twitched almost imperceptibly. "Who?" The conference room door swung open with an energy that seemed to shift the air itself. Nova Delgado strode in, all easy confidence and casual grace, wearing ripped jeans that hugged her hips and a vintage band t-shirt that looked deliberately oversized. Her dark curly hair was piled into a messy bun, and she carried a leather jacket slung over one shoulder like she'd just stepped off a motorcycle. At 26, she was the polar opposite of Vivian's polished elegance, and she knew it. "Sorry I'm late," Nova said, her smile brilliant and unapologetic as she dropped into the empty chair across from Vivian. "My vocal warm-up ran long, and then my assistant forgot to charge my car, and," she waved a hand dismissively. "You know how it goes." Vivian's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her water glass. She knew exactly how it went. You showed up early, you respected people's time, you conducted yourself with professionalism. But of course, such considerations wouldn't occur to Hollywood's newest golden girl, the one who'd shot to fame via a viral TikTok and parlayed it into sold-out arenas. "Nova," Richard said warmly, "we're thrilled to have you. Vivian, meet your duet partner." Nova turned that megawatt smile on Vivian, extending a hand across the table. "Vivian Cross. I can't tell you how excited I am about this. I've been a huge fan of your work since I was a kid, like, literally, my mom used to play your albums in the car, and I'd sing along to every word." Vivian stood, accepting the handshake with practiced courtesy. Nova's grip was warm, firm, startlingly sincere. "Welcome to the project, Ms. Delgado. Please, call me Nova. We're going to be making music together for the next 6 months, after all." She winked, actually winked, and Vivian felt a headache forming behind her right eye. Looking forward to working with you, Vivian replied, each word precisely chosen, perfectly delivered, like every lyric she'd ever written, every stage she'd ever commanded. This is going to be amazing, Nova gushed, seemingly oblivious to the Arctic temperature of Vivian's response. I've been listening to your entire catalog on repeat for the last month. The way you layer harmonies? The emotional depth in Midnight Rain? I have so many ideas, maybe we could grab coffee later, Anne. I have several appointments today, Vivian cut in smoothly. Perhaps another time. Oh, right, of course. Nova's enthusiasm didn't dim a whit. Well, I should run, my producer's probably having a meltdown waiting for updates. See you all at the first recording session. The door closed behind her with the same whirlwind energy she'd brought in. For a moment, the room sat in the vacuum of her absence. Then Vivian's eyes narrowed at Richard. 20 years I've worked to curate this legacy, she said, her voice dropping to steel. And you want to give it to a girl who got lucky on a social media app? She doesn't understand what this album means, what these songs mean to people. She'll turn it into another viral circus. Vivian, Richard started, but she wasn't finished. She treats everything like a game. Like a fun adventure she stumbled into. Do you know how many times she's been late to rehearsals for her own tour? How many interviews she's derailed with inappropriate jokes? This isn't some indie EP we can risk on inexperience. This is exactly why we need her, Richard cut in firmly. Your precision, her spontaneity. Your technique, her raw instinct. Together, you'll create something extraordinary. The numbers don't lie, her fan base is massive, and they'll follow her to anything. We need that crossover appeal. Or a disaster, Vivian countered. The decision is final. Contracts are signed. Announcement goes out tomorrow. Richard's tone was gentle but immovable. Vivian rose from her chair, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Then I hope you know what you're doing. Because I've spent my entire career earning every single note, every single award. And I won't let someone who treats music like a hobby compromise this project. She left before anyone could respond, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm against the polished floor. In her wake, she heard one of the producers mutter, "Well, that went better than expected." It hadn't. They just didn't know it yet. The first recording session was scheduled for 9 a.m. at Monarch's flagship studio in Hollywood. Vivian arrived at 8:15, as she always did, to ensure the room was set up to her specifications, the microphone placement perfect, the monitors calibrated to her exact preferences. The engineer, a veteran named Dave who'd worked with everyone from Aretha to Adele, nodded at her with familiar respect. Ready when you are, Viv. Nova's not here yet, Vivian observed, checking her watch with barely concealed irritation. She's got the schedule. She'll show. At 8:45, the door burst open and Nova swept in, trailing a cloud of jasmine perfume and carrying 2 coffee cups. She was dressed more professionally today, a cropped blazer over a silk camisole, high-waisted trousers, but she'd paired them with chunky sneakers that squeaked on the studio floor. Morning, everyone. Nova's voice carried across the room with that same effortless warmth. I brought coffee, didn't know what everyone liked, so I got a variety. An assistant trailed behind her with a carrier, and Vivian watched, slightly stunned, as Nova personally distributed cups to each crew member, remembering names she couldn't possibly know yet, Dave the engineer, Marcus the assistant, even the intern who'd been hiding in the corner. When Nova reached Vivian's spot at the mixing desk, she hesitated for just a moment. Black coffee, 1 sugar, she said, placing a cup in front of Vivian. That's still your preference, right? I remembered from that Rolling Stone interview, the one where you talked about your pre-show routine. Vivian stared at the coffee, thrown off balance. Yes. That's correct. Great. Nova beamed, then turned to greet the arranger who'd just walked in. The session began with a simple warm-up track, a stripped-down cover of a classic ballad, just piano and vocals. Vivian expected to have to correct Nova's phrasing, to guide her through the emotional nuances. But when Nova opened her mouth to sing, the room fell silent. Her voice was nothing like the glossy pop productions Vivian had heard on the radio. It was raw, aching, full of cracks and vulnerability that she'd somehow hidden behind production. She sang like she'd lived every word, like the song was written for her alone. When she hit the bridge, her voice broke on a high note, but it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, and it was devastating. Vivian felt the rest of the room fade away as she stepped up to her own microphone, letting her voice intertwine with Nova's. Their harmonies shouldn't have worked. Vivian's controlled, crystalline alto against Nova's smoky, unpredictable contralto, but they did. They slid together like puzzle pieces, filling spaces the other left empty. When the track ended, Dave let out a low whistle. That's the take. That's the one. Nova turned to Vivian, her eyes bright with something that looked like wonder. That was. I've never felt that before. The way you followed me, you let me lead, and then you took over, and it was like we'd been singing together for years. Vivian finished, her voice softer than she intended. She cleared her throat, gathering herself. Your phrasing is unconventional. But it works. Thanks. I think. Nova laughed, and Vivian noticed the way her cheeks flushed when she was embarrassed, a rare glimpse behind the confident facade. The rest of the session passed in a blur of creative energy and mounting tension. Every time Nova took a risk, Vivian found herself leaning into it instead of correcting it. Every time Vivian nailed a difficult run, she caught Nova watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. By the time they wrapped, it was past 6 p.m. The crew filtered out, leaving the two of them alone in the dimly lit studio. Vivian was packing her bag when Nova approached, hesitating at the edge of the mixing desk. Hey. I know you're probably busy, but do you want to grab dinner? There's a great Italian place around the corner, super low-key. No paparazzi. Vivian paused. Every instinct told her to say no, to maintain professional distance. But something about Nova's earnest expression, the way she bit her lower lip, waiting, made her reconsider. Fine. But I'm paying. And we're not discussing work. Nova's smile was like sunrise. Deal. The restaurant was exactly as Nova had promised, quiet, intimate, with red checkered tablecloths and candles flickering in mason jars. They were tucked into a corner booth where no one could see them, and Vivian found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did outside her own home. Okay, question, Nova said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. What's the one song you've written that you're most proud of? And don't say the one that won you the Grammy, I want the real answer. Vivian considered this. There's a B-side from my third album, Silent Hours. It never charted, never got radio play. But it's the most honest thing I've ever written. About loss, about learning to live with the silence after someone leaves. Nova's expression softened. I know that song. I found it on a deep-cut playlist in college. I cried for like an hour. Most people don't know it exists. I told you, I'm a fan. Nova set down her fork, her gaze suddenly serious. I've been listening to you since I was 12. When my mom left, your albums were what got me through. Midnight Rain was the first song that made me feel like someone understood. Vivian felt something shift in her chest, a crack in the carefully constructed wall she'd built around herself. I didn't know that. There's a lot you don't know about me. Nova's smile was rueful. Like the fact that I've been making music since I was a kid, but nobody took me seriously until I blew up on social media. They think I'm just a lucky influencer who stumbled into fame. But I worked my ass off in local clubs, open mics, anywhere that would have me. I just didn't have the right connections. Vivian studied her across the table, really looked at her for perhaps the first time. The dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. The calluses on her fingertips from years of guitar. The way she fidgeted when she talked about her past, like she was waiting for someone to dismiss her. I know what that's like, Vivian said quietly. I spent years opening for bigger acts, sleeping in vans, before anyone gave me a chance. Nova's eyes widened. You? But you're Vivian Cross. You've been famous forever. No one starts out famous. We all have to prove ourselves. And the people who look like they have it easy, they usually have the hardest battles behind the scenes. The words hung in the air between them, and Vivian realized she'd said more than she'd intended. But Nova didn't smirk or mock her. She just nodded, her expression soft and grateful. Thanks for saying that. It means more than you know. They finished dinner in companionable silence, the tension of their first meeting dissolving into something warmer. When the check came, Vivian paid despite Nova's protests, and they walked out into the cool Los Angeles night. Same time tomorrow? Nova asked, pausing by her car. Recording session is at 10. I meant dinner. If you're free. Vivian should have said no. She should have maintained the professional boundary, kept things simple. But Nova was looking at her with that hopeful, vulnerable expression, and Vivian heard herself say, I'm free. Nova's smile was incandescent. Great. I'll text you the place. Weeks passed, and the album began to take shape. Vivian and Nova developed a rhythm, arrive early, lay down tracks, argue over production choices, then retreat to some quiet restaurant where they could talk for hours without the pressure of the studio. The arguments were frequent but never toxic. Vivian would insist on a precise harmony, Nova would push for a rougher, more emotional take. They'd go back and forth, the tension crackling between them, until suddenly one of them would relent, or, more often, they'd find a compromise that was better than either original idea. You're impossible, Vivian said one afternoon, throwing her hands up after Nova had insisted on re-recording a bridge for the 5th time. And you're a control freak, Nova shot back, but there was no venom in it. That's why we work. Because I'm a control freak? Because you push me to be better. You don't let me settle. And Nova paused, her voice dropping. I push you to take risks. To let go of the perfect take and find the real one. Vivian met her eyes across the soundproof glass. The engineer had stepped out for a break, leaving them alone in the control room. The air between them felt electric, charged with something that went beyond music. You've made me a better artist, Vivian admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. I didn't think that was possible at this stage. Nova stepped closer, close enough that Vivian could smell her perfume, could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. You've made me believe I deserve to be here. With you. Their faces were inches apart. Vivian could feel the warmth radiating from Nova's body, could hear the slight hitch in her breathing. Every instinct screamed at her to step back, to maintain the careful distance that had protected her for 20 years. But she didn't want to. Can I tell you something? Nova whispered. Something I've wanted to say since the first time I saw you in that conference room? Vivian nodded, unable to speak. I've had a crush on you for years, Nova admitted, her cheeks flushing pink. Not just as a fan, as a person. I've watched every interview, read every article. I know you're private, and I know this is probably unprofessional, but... Vivian closed the distance between them. The kiss was nothing like the ones she'd experienced in her younger years, passionate and messy and full of uncertainty. This was soft, tentative, a question more than an answer. Nova's lips were warm and tasted faintly of the peppermint tea she'd been drinking, and Vivian felt something crack open inside her chest. When they broke apart, Nova's eyes were wide and dazed. That was stupid, Vivian finished, but she was smiling. We shouldn't have done that. Then why does it feel so right? Vivian didn't have an answer. She just pulled Nova closer and kissed her again, deeper this time, letting herself forget about contracts and deadlines and the watchful eyes of the industry. For a moment, there was only Nova, warm and real and utterly terrifying. They managed to keep their relationship secret for exactly 3 weeks. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Vivian's phone exploded with notifications. She'd been in the studio, going over arrangements with the arranger, when her assistant burst in, pale-faced and frantic. Vivian. You need to see this. A grainy photo had surfaced on a gossip blog, Vivian and Nova leaving a restaurant, their hands intertwined, Nova's head resting on Vivian's shoulder. The caption read, Vivian crosses new collaborator, or something more. Within hours, the story had gone viral. Headlines screamed across every entertainment outlet, Vivian crosses secret romance with pop's newest star, age gap love, inside the scandalous duet, is Nova Delgado the reason Vivian Cross hasn't released an album in 5 years? The comments were brutal. Some fans were supportive, but many were vicious. Vivian's old enough to be her mom. Nova's just using her for clout. This is so clearly a publicity stunt for the album. Vivian sat in her empty apartment, staring at her phone, her heart pounding with a familiar kind of dread. She'd been through scandals before, rumors, accusations, the relentless scrutiny of the public eye. But this was different. This wasn't about a bad review or a failed relationship. This was about Nova. Nova, who'd worked so hard to be taken seriously. Nova, who'd finally earned the respect she deserved. And now Vivian had jeopardized all of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nova, I'm outside. Let me in. Vivian opened the door to find Nova standing there, her hair windswept, her eyes red-rimmed. She'd clearly been crying. Have you seen what they're saying? Nova asked, her voice shaking. Every word. I don't care what they say about me. Nova stepped inside, grabbing Vivian's hands. But I won't let them destroy you. Your legacy, your career, you've worked so hard. Don't you see? Vivian said, her voice breaking. They're not just attacking me. They're attacking you. They're saying you're just a groupie, a gold digger who's using me for fame. And I can't let that happen to you. So what, we just end it? Nova's eyes flashed with something that looked like anger. We pretend this never happened, go back to being professional colleagues, and let them win? Nova. I love you. The words came out fierce and desperate, filling the space between them. I know it's fast, I know this is complicated, but I love you. And I don't care what the world thinks. Do you? Vivian stared at her, the weight of 20 years of careful self-protection pressing down on her shoulders. She'd spent so long building walls, keeping people at arm's length, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But with Nova, the walls didn't seem to matter. I love you too, she whispered. And that terrifies me. Then we'll be terrified together. They decided to go public on their own terms. A joint interview with a respected music journalist, carefully orchestrated, where they spoke candidly about their relationship and the album. Vivian had expected backlash, and she got it, but she also got something she hadn't anticipated, a wave of support from fans who saw two women in love and chose to celebrate it. "I've been hiding for too long," Vivian told the interviewer, Nova's hand clasped tightly in hers. "Not because I was ashamed, but because I was afraid. Afraid of what people would think, afraid of how it would affect my career. But Nova taught me that love isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to be proud of." Nova squeezed her hand, her smile bright through tears. "She's the bravest person I know. And I'm so lucky to call her mine." The interview went viral, but this time, for all the right reasons. #VivianandNova trended for days, and the album pre-orders spiked to record numbers. The narrative had shifted, from scandal to romance, from gossip to inspiration. The album release party was held at a rooftop venue overlooking the city. Vivian stood at the edge of the crowd, champagne glass in hand, watching as Nova worked the room with her effortless charm. She was wearing a crimson dress that made her look like a flame, and Vivian couldn't stop smiling. "You look happy," Richard said, appearing at her elbow. "I haven't seen you like this in years." "I am happy." Vivian turned to him, her smile widening. "And I have you to thank. For pairing us, against all my objections." Richard chuckled. "I knew what I was doing. You just had to figure it out yourself." Across the room, Nova caught her eye and raised her glass in a toast. Vivian raised hers in return, the gesture felt like a promise. They'd survived the storm, and now they were standing in the calm together. Later that night, when the party had dwindled to a handful of close friends, Nova found Vivian on the quiet balcony, staring out at the lights of the city. "Hey," Nova said, slipping her arms around Vivian's waist from behind. "Come back inside. People are asking for you." I needed a moment. Vivian turned in her arms, wrapping her hands around Nova's neck. "To remember how we got here. From that first meeting, when I thought you were the most unprofessional person I'd ever met. And now you're in love with me." Nova grinned. "Funny how life works." "Funny." Vivian leaned in, kissing her softly. "I don't say this enough, but thank you. For being patient with me. For not giving up when I pushed you away. Never." Nova's voice was fierce. "I told you, I've been waiting for you my whole life. I'm not going anywhere." They stood there, wrapped in each other, as the city hummed below them. The album was a success, the tour was sold out, and the world finally knew what they'd known all along, that some duets were meant to be more than just music. 1 year later, they bought a house together in the hills, a sprawling mid-century modern with floor-to-ceiling windows and a recording studio in the basement. They spent their days writing songs, gardening, and arguing over who got to pick the playlist for dinner. "I still can't believe you talked me into getting a dog," Vivian said, watching Nova chase their golden retriever puppy across the backyard. "He needed a home. We needed chaos. It's a perfect match." Vivian laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that she'd never let herself have before Nova. "You're a menace. And you love me." "Forever," Vivian said, and she meant it. They were planning their wedding, a small, intimate ceremony at a vineyard in Napa, with only family and closest friends. There'd be no cameras, no press, just two women making a promise to each other. But first, they had one more song to record. A duet that would become the closing track of their joint EP, a love letter to each other, and to everyone who'd ever been told that their love wasn't valid. Nova sat at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys. Vivian stood beside her, microphone in hand, the lyrics scrawled on a piece of paper between them. "You ready?" Nova asked. "For anything," Vivian replied. "As long as I'm with you." The first chords filled the room, and their voices rose together, imperfect, raw, and achingly beautiful. It was the sound of two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd fought through fear and judgment and come out the other side holding hands. And when the song ended, they kissed in the empty studio, the echo of their voices still hanging in the air like a promise. They'd spent years searching for the right notes, the perfect harmony, the kind of connection that could only exist between two souls meant to find each other. And they'd found it, not in a studio, not on a stage, but in the quiet moments between songs. The world would keep spinning. The industry would keep demanding. But Vivian and Nova had built something that couldn't be broken by headlines or critics or the relentless passage of time. They had each other. And that was more than enough. The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of their new house, casting soft shadows across the bedroom. Vivian woke first, as she always did, and spent a few quiet moments just watching Nova sleep. Her partner's face was relaxed, peaceful, the usual whirlwind energy temporarily stilled. Dark curls fanned across the pillow, and one hand was stretched out across the mattress, reaching for Vivian even in unconsciousness. 3 months had passed since the album release party, since they'd gone public, since Vivian had let herself believe that this could actually work. And every morning, she woke up still surprised, not that Nova was there, but that she deserved her. "Stop staring," Nova murmured, her voice thick with sleep. "It's creepy." "Then stop being so beautiful." Nova cracked one eye open, a lazy smile spreading across her face. "That's the sappiest thing you've ever said to me." "I'm allowed to be sappy. It's my house too." "Our house," Nova corrected, reaching up to pull Vivian closer. "Get back in bed. It's too early for your perfectionist energy. I have a conference call with the label in an hour." "The label can wait." "I can't." Nova tugged her down, pressing a kiss to her jaw, her neck, her collarbone. "Besides, I have a song idea I want to run by you." Vivian sighed dramatically, but she was already melting into the touch. "You're impossible. And yet you love me. Against my better judgment." Nova laughed, the sound warm and genuine, and Vivian felt her heart swell with affection. She'd spent so many years alone, not just physically, but emotionally, that she'd forgotten how it felt to be seen, to be wanted, to be loved without conditions. "I've been thinking," Nova said, propping herself up on one elbow. "About the next album. What if we co-wrote everything together? Like, not just a few duets, but a whole project. From scratch." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." "I know. But we work so well together," and Nova hesitated, her confidence flickering. "I want to make something that's really ours. Not just covers or reinterpretations. Something that comes from both of us." Vivian considered this. She'd always been fiercely independent in her songwriting, rarely letting anyone else into the process. But Nova was different. With Nova, collaboration felt less like compromise and more like discovery. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "But it's going to be messy. I have strong opinions about chord progressions." "So do I. That's what makes it fun." Vivian laughed, pulling Nova close. "Fine. But I'm not letting you use autotune. Deal. And I'm not letting you overproduce everything until it sounds sterile. Deal." The songwriting sessions quickly became the highlight of their relationship. They'd set up a makeshift studio in the sunroom, with a piano, a guitar, and a collection of notebooks that quickly filled with half-finished lyrics. Sometimes they'd work for hours in intense concentration, other times, they'd get distracted by arguments about what kind of takeout to order for dinner. "I'm telling you," Nova insisted one afternoon, her fingers flying across the piano keys. The bridge needs to build to a key change. It's more emotional. Key changes are predictable, Vivian countered, leaning against the piano. It's a cheap trick. Predictable doesn't mean ineffective. People love key changes. They make you feel like you're soaring. They make you feel like you're watching a Broadway musical. Nova groaned, throwing her hands up. You're impossible. You know that, right? So you keep telling me. Vivian's smile was soft. But I still think we should try it my way first. If it doesn't work, we'll try yours. Fine. But when my way works better, I'm going to say I told you so for the rest of our lives. You already do that about everything. Because I'm always right. They fell into laughter, the tension dissolving as easily as it had appeared. This was what Vivian loved most about Nova, her ability to turn conflict into connection, to make even arguments feel like intimate conversations. I love working with you, Nova said, her voice suddenly serious. I hope you know that. I do. Vivian reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind Nova's ear. I love working with you too. Even when you're being stubborn. Especially when I'm being stubborn. Don't push it. Nova grinned, leaning in for a kiss. You love me anyway. Yeah, Vivian admitted, her voice soft. I really do. The album took shape over the following months, a sprawling collection of songs that spanned genres and emotions. There were upbeat tracks that Nova insisted on, full of energy and pop hooks, and haunting ballads that Vivian crafted with meticulous care. But the best songs were the ones they wrote together, the ones where their voices intertwined and their perspectives blended into something neither could have created alone. One of those songs, Electric, became the lead single. It was a love song about unexpected connections, about two people who never should have worked together but somehow became inseparable. The video, directed by a rising queer filmmaker, featured the two of them performing in a dimly lit studio, their chemistry palpable even through the screen. The night it premiered, they watched it together on the couch, Nova's head resting in Vivian's lap. We look good together, Nova observed, her voice light. We look like we're in love, Vivian corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Nova looked up at her, eyes bright with something that looked like wonder. Because when I look at that video, all I see is you. And all I feel is home. Vivian's chest tightened with emotion. She'd spent so long building walls, protecting herself from vulnerability, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But Nova had dismantled those walls without even trying, not by pushing, but by simply being herself. I love you, Vivian said, the words feeling more significant than they ever had. I know I've said it before, but I want you to understand what that means. I've never let anyone this close. I've never trusted anyone the way I trust you. Nova sat up, taking Vivian's face in her hands. I get it. Because I feel the same way. Every day, I wake up and I'm still surprised that this is real. That you chose me. I didn't choose you, Vivian said softly. I just stopped fighting it. Same thing. Maybe. They kissed, slow and deep, and Vivian felt the last of her defenses dissolve. She'd spent 20 years protecting herself from the world, and now she realized what she'd been missing, not just love, but the freedom to be loved without fear. The tour announcement came with its own set of challenges. 20 cities across the U.S., followed by a European leg, starting in 4 months. It was the kind of schedule that would test any relationship, especially one that was still so new. I don't want to do it, Nova said flatly when Vivian told her. I mean, I do want to tour, I love performing. But I don't want to spend months away from you. We'll be together, Vivian said, surprised by Nova's intensity. We're co-headliners, remember? I know. But that's different. On stage, we're performing. In the bus, we're exhausted. There's no, Nova gestured vaguely. Space. For just us. Vivian sat down beside her on the couch, taking her hand. I understand. But we can make it work. We'll set boundaries. We'll make time for each other. Even when you're exhausted and I'm grumpy and we've been in the same bus for 18 hours? Especially then. Vivian smiled, squeezing her hand. That's when it counts. Anyone can be in love when things are easy. The real test is staying in love when things are hard. Nova was quiet for a moment, then she let out a long breath. You're right. I know you're right. I get scared sometimes. That I'll mess this up. You won't. How do you know? Vivian leaned in, pressing her forehead to Nova's. Because I know you. And I know us. We're not perfect, I'm stubborn, you're impulsive, and we argue about key changes, but we're committed. And that means more than being perfect. Nova's eyes were glassy with emotion. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. I just didn't let anyone see it before. Nova laughed, the tension breaking. I love you. Even when you're insufferable. Especially when I'm insufferable? Don't push it. The tour was everything they'd expected and more. Sold-out arenas, screaming crowds, the kind of adrenaline rush that made every ounce of exhaustion worthwhile. But Vivian had been right, the real challenge wasn't the performance, it was everything in between. They spent hours on the tour bus, navigating each other's moods and quirks. Nova needed alone time after shows, a quiet hour to decompress. Vivian preferred to stay connected, to talk through every detail of the performance. They clashed, they argued, they gave each other space, and then they came back together stronger than before. Okay, Nova said one night, sprawled across the bus's tiny couch. I admit it. You were right. Touring isn't as hard as I thought it would be. Did you just say I was right? Vivian raised an eyebrow. Can I get that in writing? Don't push it. I'm vulnerable right now. You're always vulnerable. That's part of what I love about you. Nova sat up, her expression softening. Really? Really? You wear your heart on your sleeve. You feel everything so deeply, the highs, the lows, the in-betweens. It's what makes you such a good performer. And it's what makes me trust you. Nova was quiet for a moment, then she crossed the small space between them and settled into Vivian's lap. I never thought I'd find someone who understood me like this, she whispered. Someone who doesn't want me to be different. I don't want you to be different. I want you to be you, loud, messy, emotional, everything. Vivian wrapped her arms around Nova, pulling her close. That's the person I fell in love with. Even when I steal the covers? Especially when you steal the covers. Nova laughed, burying her face in Vivian's shoulder. I love you. I don't say it enough. Say it now. I love you, Vivian Cross. With all my ridiculous, chaotic, cover-stealing heart. Vivian pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I love you too. And I'm not going anywhere. The European leg brought new challenges and new joys. They performed in Paris, London, Berlin, and dozens of other cities, each audience more enthusiastic than the last. But it was the night in Rome that Vivian would always remember. They'd finished the show and slipped away from the after-party, finding a quiet cafe near the Trevi Fountain. The city was magical at night, its ancient streets lit by golden lamplight, and Vivian felt like she was in a dream. "This is insane," Nova said, her eyes wide as she took in the fountain. "We're in Rome. We're performing in Rome. And I'm here with you." "We're here together," Vivian corrected. "That's what matters." Nova turned to her, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Vivian. I need to tell you something." Vivian's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about this for a while," Nova said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "About us. About our future. And I realized something." "What?" Nova took a deep breath, then reached into her pocket. Vivian watched, her pulse racing, as Nova pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we haven't been together that long," Nova said, her hands trembling slightly. "And I know we're both busy, and there's always going to be something, a tour, an album, another commitment. But I don't want to wait for the perfect moment. Because with you, every moment is perfect." She opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I'm not asking you to marry me right now. But I'm asking you to promise that someday, when the timing is right, you'll say yes. That you'll let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." Vivian stared at the ring, then at Nova, tears blurring her vision. She'd spent her whole life avoiding commitments, protecting herself from the kind of vulnerability that came with loving someone this deeply. But with Nova, none of that mattered. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Someday. When the timing is right. Yes." Nova's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? Really?" Vivian pulled her into a kiss, the fountain sparkling behind them. "I told you, I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you." The proposal, if you could call it that, had been intimate and private, but the ring quickly became visible. Vivian wore it on a chain around her neck during performances, a subtle signal to anyone paying close attention. Fans noticed, of course, and speculation ran rampant. But Vivian and Nova refused to confirm anything, letting the mystery build. "We're not hiding," Vivian told a reporter who pressed her on the subject. "We're just choosing to keep some things private. Our love belongs to us." The response was overwhelmingly positive. In a world where queer relationships were still scrutinized, Vivian and Nova had become symbols of something larger than themselves. They were proof that love could survive the spotlight, that vulnerability could be a strength, that two women could build a life together without apologizing for it. But not everyone was supportive. Nova's father, a traditional man who'd never fully accepted her career, made his feelings clear when he called one evening. "You're throwing away your career," he said, his voice tinny through the phone. "Aligning yourself with an older woman who's clearly using you." "She's not using me. We love each other. Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't sell albums. You need to think about your future." "My future is with her." Nova's voice was steady, but Vivian could see the tension in her shoulders. "And if you can't accept that, then I don't want you in my life." The call ended shortly after, and Nova stood in the kitchen, her hands shaking. Vivian wrapped her arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "That took courage. He's wrong, you know. About us. I believe that, even if he doesn't." Vivian turned Nova around, cupping her face. "I know he's wrong. And I know you believe it. But I also know that doesn't make it hurt less. Having family reject you, I understand that pain." Nova's eyes were glassy. "You do?" "I do. My parents weren't exactly thrilled when I started dating women. It took them years to come around. Some of them still haven't." "Really?" Vivian nodded. I spent a long time trying to earn their approval. It was exhausting. And then I realized, I don't need their approval. I just need to live my life honestly. And if they can't accept that, it's their loss. Nova leaned into her, her voice small. You make everything seem possible. Because it is. With you, everything is possible. The wedding took place a year later, in a small vineyard in the Italian countryside. It was exactly as they'd envisioned, intimate, elegant, and full of love. Only their closest friends and family attended, no press, no cameras, just a celebration of two people who'd found each other against all odds. Vivian wore a flowing white dress that caught the sunlight, her hair loose and adorned with flowers. Nova wore a tailored ivory suit, her curls tumbling around her shoulders in perfect chaos. They walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, choosing to enter as equals. I was thinking about something, Nova murmured as they stood at the altar, the officiant's words fading into background noise. What? Our first duet. The one we recorded that first day in the studio. Remember how we argued about the bridge? Vivian smiled. I remember you thought I was being controlling. Because you were. Nova's eyes sparkled with tears and joy. But we made it work. Just like we made everything work. And I realized, that's what love is. It's not perfect, and it's not easy. It's just, choosing each other. Every day. Even when it's messy. Vivian squeezed her hands. I choose you. Today, and every day. I choose you too. Their vows were simple, honest, and full of the kind of intimacy that only came from truly knowing another person. Vivian spoke of Nova's courage, her warmth, her refusal to let fear dictate her life. Nova spoke of Vivian's strength, her depth, the way she'd taught Nova what it meant to be truly loved. When the officiant pronounced them partners for life, they kissed to the sound of applause and tears. It wasn't the loudest celebration, but it was the most meaningful. Later that night, as they sat on the terrace overlooking the vineyard, Nova leaned into Vivian's shoulder. I can't believe this is real, she whispered. I can't believe I get to spend the rest of my life with you. Get used to it, Vivian said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Because I'm not going anywhere. The following years brought challenges and triumphs. They released 2 more albums together, both met with critical acclaim. Vivian won a Grammy for Best Album of the Year, and Nova finally got the recognition she deserved as a songwriter. They built a life together, not just a shared career, but a shared home, shared routines, shared dreams. They adopted a rescue dog named Ziggy, who quickly became the center of their universe. Vivian insisted on training him with military precision. Nova preferred to spoil him with treats. Ziggy, naturally, sided with Nova. He's a menace, Vivian said one afternoon, watching Ziggy chase his tail across the living room. He's a genius. He knows how to get what he wants. He gets it from you. Nova grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. There were moments of doubt, too, arguments about career decisions, insecurities about the future, the occasional fear that they were moving too fast or not fast enough. But they always found their way back to each other, always remembered that they were on the same team. One evening, after a particularly difficult meeting with their management, Vivian sat on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Nova found her there, still in her work clothes, looking smaller than usual. Hey. Nova sat down beside her, taking her hand. Talk to me. I don't know. Vivian's voice was barely audible. Everything is moving so fast. There's always another deadline, another commitment. I'm not sure I can keep up. Nova was quiet for a moment. You know what I realized? That's the same thing you said to me when we first met. That you were afraid of losing control. Vivian's eyes were red-rimmed. I don't want to lose control. I don't want to lose us. You won't. I won't let you. Nova wrapped her arms around Vivian, pulling her close. We're going to figure this out. Not because I have all the answers, but because we're in this together. We always have been. Vivian leaned into the embrace, letting herself be held. I'm scared. Me too. But I'm more scared of not having you. So we'll face this together. Like we always do. The tour wound down, the album cycle ended, and Vivian and Nova finally had a chance to breathe. They retreated to their house in the hills, spending long days in the garden and even longer nights in the recording studio. They wrote songs that would never be released, songs that were just for them, private expressions of love that no one else would ever hear. I've been thinking about writing a memoir, Vivian said one evening, her fingers tracing patterns on Nova's skin. About the journey. The struggles, the victories. Everything that led me here. That's a great idea. People would love to hear your story. I want to include you. And us. Nova's expression softened. You want to write about us? I want to write about the most important part of my life. And that's you. Nova kissed her, slow and sweet. I'll help. I'll bring wine and emotional support. And if you write anything embarrassing about me, I'll cross it out. You wouldn't dare. Try me. A few years later, Vivian's memoir was published to widespread acclaim. It wasn't just a celebrity biography, it was a meditation on love, loss, and the courage to let yourself be seen. In one chapter, she wrote about Nova. I spent my whole life hiding. I thought I was protecting myself, but I was really just isolating myself. Then Nova walked into that conference room, and she didn't just see me, she saw through me. And instead of running away, she stayed. She stayed through my mistakes, my fears, my stubbornness. She taught me that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to show up every day, even when it's messy. I love her not because she makes me better, though she does, but because she makes me feel seen. And that, more than any award or achievement, is what makes life worth living. Nova read the chapter with tears streaming down her face. You're going to make me cry. And then I'll have to show up to the book launch looking like a disaster. It'll be a good disaster. You'll look beautiful. You always say that. Because it's always true. The book tour was grueling, but Nova was there for every stop, in the audience, cheering her on, or backstage, holding her hand when the nerves got too intense. Vivian had never felt so supported in her entire career. Thank you, Vivian said one night, after a particularly emotional reading. For being here. For everything. Nova shrugged, feigning nonchalance. What are you talking about? I'm just your arm candy. You're so much more than that. I know. Nova grinned. I'm your gorgeous, talented, emotionally available arm candy. Vivian laughed, pulling her close. I love you. With all my heart. I love you too. Forever. 10 years had passed since that first recording session, and Vivian could still remember every detail, the way Nova had burst through the conference room door, the way her smile had seemed to light up the entire room, the way Vivian had dismissed her as just another flash in the pan. She'd been so wrong about so many things. But she'd been right about the most important one. Nova was the love of her life. They were sitting on the porch of their beach house now, the one they'd bought 5 years ago as a retreat from the relentless pace of their careers. The house wasn't large or ostentatious, just a modest Cape Cod with a wraparound porch and a view of the ocean that seemed to stretch into eternity. It was their sanctuary, the place where they could escape from the world and just be themselves. "This is nice," Nova said, her voice soft as she watched the sun dip below the horizon. "We should do this more often. We say that every time we're here. And then we get busy. Well, we need to stop getting busy. Or at least learn to say no to things." Vivian smiled, reaching over to take Nova's hand. "You've become wise in your old age." "I'm 36, Vivian. That's not old. Compared to 48? Nova laughed, squeezing her hand. "You don't look a day over 40. Don't push it." They sat in comfortable silence, the sound of waves providing a gentle soundtrack. A decade together had taught them the value of silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words, that was simply a reflection of how comfortable they were with each other. "I was thinking about our first tour," Vivian said eventually. "The one where we argued about everything." "Argued?" "We had creative differences." "It's different." "That's what you called it, but I called it arguing." Nova grinned. "We had some good times, though. Remember that night in Paris?" "Remind me." "We got lost trying to find that little bistro, and you insisted you knew the way. We walked for 2 hours, and it turned out we were going the wrong direction the whole time." "I remember the wrong direction. I don't remember the bistro. We never found it. We ended up eating crepes from a street vendor and sitting on the steps of the Sacré-Cœur, watching the city lights." Vivian's expression softened. "That was a good night." "It was. Because I was with you." Vivian leaned over, pressing a kiss to Nova's temple. "You're such a romantic." "Only for you." The next morning, Vivian woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Nova humming in the kitchen. She padded downstairs, still in her pajamas, and found Nova at the stove, making pancakes, a tradition they'd started early in their relationship and never quite abandoned. "Good morning," Vivian said, wrapping her arms around Nova from behind. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. I was thinking about the charity gala next month." Vivian groaned. "I'd forgotten about that. Everyone's going to be there. All the big names, the industry people, the press. It's going to be exhausting." "Then let's not go." Nova turned, spatula in hand. "We can't skip it. You're getting an award." "I don't need an award to know I'm doing good work." "I know. But it's important to show up. To be visible. Especially for young queer artists who need to see people like us succeed." Vivian sighed, knowing Nova was right. They'd built their careers not just on talent, but on visibility, on being unapologetically themselves in an industry that often demanded conformity. It was exhausting sometimes, but it was also necessary. "You're right. I'll go. But I'm not wearing a dress." "You always say that. And then you wear a dress. Because you buy me a dress and tell me I look beautiful." "Because you do look beautiful." Vivian laughed, shaking her head. "Fine. I'll wear the dress. But I'm complaining about it the whole time." "Wouldn't expect anything less." The gala was everything they'd expected and more. Vivian received the Lifetime Achievement Award, a recognition of her decades in the industry and her contributions to music. Her speech was brief and heartfelt, thanking the people who'd supported her, and especially thanking Nova. "She's been my partner in every sense of the word," Vivian said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Not just in music, but in life. She taught me that love isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to be celebrated. And I'm so grateful that I get to celebrate it with her." Nova was crying in the front row, trying to hide it behind a smile. When Vivian returned to her seat, they held hands under the table, their fingers intertwined. "That was perfect," Nova whispered. "I meant every word." "I know you did. That's why it was perfect." The evening wound down, and they found themselves on the rooftop terrace of the hotel, overlooking the city. The gala was still going on below, but they'd slipped away for a moment of quiet. "Nova," Vivian said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you." "What is it?" Vivian reached into her pocket, pulling out a small box. Nova's breath caught. "Vivian. Is that?" "I know we've already done this," Vivian said, opening the box to reveal a stunning ring, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in white gold. "And I know we've been together for so long that it feels like we're already married. But I want to do it properly. I want to ask you, officially, in front of everyone who matters. Will you marry me?" Nova's tears spilled over. "You're proposing to me at a charity gala?" "I'm proposing to you right now. The gala just happens to be happening." Nova laughed, a sound that was half cry, half joy. "Yes. Of course yes." Vivian slid the ring onto Nova's finger, then pulled her into a kiss. The city sparkled below them, and Vivian felt like she was flying. "I love you," she whispered. "I've loved you since that first recording session, even when I was pretending I didn't." "I knew," Nova said, her smile radiant. "I could always tell. You were just too stubborn to admit it. Better late than never." They told the world the next morning, announcing their engagement on social media with a simple photo of their hands intertwined, the ring visible. The response was overwhelming, thousands of comments, millions of likes, and an outpouring of love from fans around the world. "Look at this," Nova said, scrolling through the comments. "People are actually crying over us. I don't understand why. We've been together for a decade. This was inevitable. It's romantic, Vivian. Let people have their moment. I'm not stopping them. I'm just saying. You're just being Vivian." Nova kissed her cheek. "And that's why I love you." The wedding took place on a beach in the Maldives, a small ceremony with only their closest friends and family. Vivian's mother, who'd finally come around, walked her down the aisle. Nova's parents sat in the front row, both of them teary-eyed. "This is it," Nova whispered as they stood at the altar, their hands clasped. "This is really happening." "It's been happening for 10 years, Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is just the public part." They exchanged vows that were personal and honest, promising not just to love each other, but to continue growing together, to support each other's dreams, and to always choose each other even when it was hard. "I choose you," Nova said, her voice steady. "I've chosen you every day since the moment I met you. And I'm going to keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life." Vivian's tears were falling freely now. "I choose you too. I was afraid to choose you at first, afraid of what it would mean, afraid of how it would change my life. But you were patient with me. You taught me that love isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to embrace. And I'm so grateful that I get to embrace it with you." The officiant pronounced them married, and they kissed to the sound of applause and ocean waves. It was perfect. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new adventures and challenges. They released more music, toured extensively, and became mentors to a new generation of queer artists. Vivian directed a documentary about the history of LGBTQ+ representation in music, and Nova started a foundation supporting young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. They adopted a daughter, Isabella, who was 5 when they brought her home. She was shy at first, but quickly warmed up to her 2 mothers, who spoiled her with love and attention. Isabella had her mother's love of music, and they spent hours teaching her to play piano and guitar. "This is better than I ever imagined," Vivian said one evening, watching Nova and Isabella play a duet on the piano. "This family. This life. I didn't know I could have this." "Neither did I," Nova said, her voice soft. "But I'm so glad we found each other. I'm so glad we built this together." Isabella looked up from the piano, her face bright. "Can we play another one? I want to learn that song you wrote for Mommy." "Which one?" Nova asked, smiling. "The one about the stars. The one you always sing to me at bedtime." Nova glanced at Vivian, her eyes shining. "That's a special song. It was the first song we wrote together. Before we were in love. Can you play it for me?" Vivian and Nova exchanged a look, then began to play, their voices blending together in the familiar melody, their daughter watching with wide-eyed wonder. The song floated through the house, filling the air with love and memory and hope. The years passed, and Isabella grew into a talented young musician, carving her own path in the industry. Vivian and Nova watched with pride as their daughter navigated the same challenges they'd faced, offering guidance and support without ever trying to control her decisions. "You're going to have to let her make her own mistakes," Vivian reminded Nova one evening, after Isabella had made a questionable choice about her next album. "I know. But it's hard to watch. Trust me, I know. But we can't protect her from everything. We can only be there for her when things go wrong." Nova sighed, leaning into Vivian. "I'm glad we have each other. I don't think I could do this alone." "You don't have to do anything alone. We're in this together." And they were. Through all the ups and downs, the triumphs and setbacks, the moments of joy and moments of doubt, Vivian and Nova remained committed to each other. They'd built a life that was rich with love, creativity, and purpose, a life that neither of them could have imagined alone. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their beach house, watching the sun set over the ocean, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first meeting in the conference room, when she dismissed Nova as just another flash in the pan, to this moment, decades later, still holding hands, still in love. "I was thinking about something," Vivian said, her voice soft. "What?" "The first time we met. I was so ready to hate you. I thought you were going to ruin everything I'd worked for." Nova laughed. "I remember. You were so cold." "Was I? I thought I was being professional." "No, you were definitely cold. But I could tell it was because you were scared. Scared of losing control, scared of being vulnerable." Vivian looked at her, surprised. "You could tell that?" "I could tell everything. I'd been watching you for years, remember? I knew every interview, every article, every clue about who you really were. I knew you were guarded, but I also knew there was more to you than that. You saw something I couldn't see. That's what love is, isn't it? Seeing the person behind the walls. And loving them anyway." Vivian leaned over, pressing a kiss to Nova's cheek. "I'm so glad you saw through me. I'm so glad you didn't give up. I would never give up on you. Not then, not ever." The next morning, Vivian woke to find Nova already up, sitting at the piano in the living room. She was playing softly, a melody Vivian didn't recognize, and her eyes were closed. "What are you playing?" Vivian asked, settling onto the bench beside her. "It's a new song. I've been working on it for a few weeks. I want to hear it." Nova looked at her, a smile playing at her lips. "It's called Forever and a Day. It's about you. About us. About this life we've built together. I'm ready." Nova began to play, and Vivian listened as the melody unfolded, a gentle, sweeping ballad that captured everything they'd been through, everything they'd become. It was about friendship and love, struggle and triumph, fear and faith. It was about choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard. When the song ended, Vivian was crying. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "That's the most beautiful thing you've ever written. It's about you. It's for you. I love you. I love you too." Nova kissed her, soft and sweet. Forever and a day. That evening, they hosted a small gathering for their closest friends, the people who'd been with them through the years, who'd supported them through the ups and downs. Sabrina, who'd become one of their dearest friends, was there with her wife. Marcus, the producer who'd first suggested they work together, toasted them with champagne. Even Richard, the label executive who'd paired them all those years ago, was there, visibly moved by how far they'd come. "I knew it would work," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I knew you two had something special. But I never imagined it would turn out like this. A marriage, a family, a legacy. You've built something remarkable." "It wasn't just us," Vivian said, her hand in Nova's. "It was everyone. The people who believed in us, who supported us, who gave us a chance." "You gave yourself a chance," Nova corrected. "You could have walked away. You could have let your fear win. But you didn't." Vivian squeezed her hand. "I had you. You made it impossible to walk away." They raised their glasses in a toast, to love, to music, to the beautiful, unexpected life they'd built together. The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. They celebrated their 20th anniversary with a trip to Paris, revisiting the city where they'd gotten lost and ended up eating crepes on the steps of Sacré-Cœur. This time, they found the bistro, and it was everything they'd hoped it would be. "This is where it all began," Nova said, looking around the cozy restaurant. "Well, not exactly here, but close enough. In a conference room in Los Angeles." "No, I mean the feeling. The feeling of being lost together and finding something better than we were looking for." Vivian smiled, reaching across the table to take Nova's hand. "I'm glad I got lost with you. I'm glad I got found with you. Forever and a day. Forever and a day." The closing years of their lives were filled with the quiet comfort of long-standing love. They continued to make music, but at a slower pace, savoring the process rather than pushing for the next hit. Isabella had her own successful career, and they were the proudest mothers in the world, watching their daughter's star rise. They traveled, they wrote, they spent long hours sitting on their porch, watching the waves and saying nothing. They'd moved past the need for constant conversation, content to simply be in each other's presence. "I don't want to leave you," Vivian said one evening, her voice quiet. "Not ever. Not for anything." "Then don't," Nova said, her voice equally soft. "We're not going anywhere. We're right here. Together." They sat in silence for a long time, the ocean providing its eternal soundtrack. Vivian thought about all the years they'd had, all the moments they'd shared, all the love they'd built. It had been a remarkable journey, from that first meeting in the conference room to this quiet evening on the porch. And she wouldn't have traded any of it for anything. "I love you," she said, the words feeling as fresh and meaningful as the first time she'd said them. "I love you too," Nova replied. "Forever."